get going? Let's do it.
This is this between us.
The number one podcast in the world.
This is
the JBU.Show featuring Austin,
from the Miller Talk Podcast,
ALLAN,
the American Sincerest,
and now your host,
Cam Allen.
Don't get what? Abolish the police? Tear down statues of Lincoln? Maybe give communism another shot? Get rid of the border patrol? Get rid of capitalism? White supremacy has never been worse? Gender is always just a social construct? It's okay to have penises in the women's swimming pool in women's prisons? Okay. No, it's not that I'm old. It's that your ideas are stupid. Don't get what? Abolish.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Chris, and this is the JBU Show. Welcome to the Friday edition. Hopefully we'll have my co-host at First Allen 2 dropping in, but I'm not sure. It is quite late for him over there on the East Coast, and so I didn't want to message him and wake him up or anything. So we will see what happens here once he gets the notification that we're live. But nonetheless, I am here. We have lots to talk about tonight. There was a ton of stuff that happened. I've got some personal stuff that we can go over. Not like personal about me, but just some we'll call it dad advice. And because despite the fact I look like I'm 12, I am in fact a dad. And then of course we have the tariff situation today. We're going to get into that a little bit and talk about how Scotus has just sold us out, essentially. Even if they were right. I opened up with Bill Maher there just for fun. He is the only leftist that I can still stand. And while, I wouldn't say that I could make it through his whole show without rolling my eyes until they dislocate from their sockets. But he can at least poke fun at himself. He can at least poke fun at the left. And he can at least be mostly honest. He chooses to be, willfully ignorant, like a lot of leftists, in order to avoid having to admit to certain things. But why is it so hard to admit that maybe some things are just not right on the left? I don't understand. And, because of that honesty, he can at least still be funny. Everyone else on the left that tries to be funny, they're just not funny because comedy doesn't come first. It comes second. And it's painfully obvious. We're going to start off tonight with a story that I was not aware of. It was posted yesterday, and I meant to get to it last night, and I forgot to, by the Second Amendment Foundation. I had never heard of this story. It involves a man named Patrick Tate Adamiak, I think. We need to get this guy out of jail. And I'll explain why. This is a big problem that conservatives have yet to deal with that has needed to be addressed for a long time. And goes a long way towards preventing the weaponization of the Second Amendment based on existing laws. Because there's something that I don't think most law-abiding citizens recognize that is a flaw in the legal system that we have when it comes to Second Amendment items and among other things, right? And this is a flaw that goes all the way back to the NFA. And thankfully, it hasn't been weaponized too badly, and therefore most people have been able to go through their lives ignoring it. However, with these agencies being politicized more and more, they are being weaponized more and more. We have to get this corrected. So we're going to start off with that story tonight. But first, because I like to start off usually with psychotic liberals, just to, get us warmed up. It is Friday after all. We're going to start off with a psychotic liberal making a Second Amendment argument here. You can already tell, and no, I didn't pause it like that. That is the starting face. You can already tell it's going to be a gem. Oh, my bad. Wrong button. There we
Guns
go.
don't kill people. Yeah, I guess you're right. Guns don't kill people. Men kill people. What? See, not only are 87% of self-unalivings that are committed with a gun done by men,
Self-unalivings means suicide. Keep going.
98% of mass shootings were committed by men. No. And 90% of all gun violence is committed by men. No, what I meant was, I agree. Guns don't kill people. Men kill people. That's not what I meant. So you're saying instead of gun control, we should have man control? Because I think that sounds fucking awesome. Well, I'm a man, and I hope girls like you stay away from guys like me.
A real thing. Real men typed in my comment section. Yeah, I'm sure. That's why she posted the comments with it.
After all, if we're going to pass laws that only affect women in an effort to save lives, why can't we do the same with men? Give me one single reason why we can't do the same to men.
First of all, we have no laws that exclusively target women. Not by name anyway. Obviously, abortion laws can't apply to men because they can't get pregnant. But that protects both men and women, babies. It's not about targeting the woman, it's about protecting the boy and girl babies. And you can agree with it, disagree with it, whatever. I'm not here to make that argument at the moment. What I'm saying is, it's not what she's claiming, obviously. Second, we already do have those laws. Last I checked, murder is illegal. Mass murder, illegal. Even suicide, illegal. I'm not really sure why, because it's not like you can charge a corpse, but it is in fact illegal. I guess so if you fail, they can put you in a psych ward. That's probably why, but every time they think they have a point, it's like painfully stupid, and I don't even want to have to make an argument because it shouldn't have to be made, but there it is. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't let her finish, apparently. I thought she was done, but Crazy Eyes has a little more.
Fucking bitch.
You know, she was kind of spot on with that last one.
Fucking bitch.
I know that's supposed to be a reference to Renee Good's shooter, but you're not going to get me to be mad about it. I probably would have muttered the same thing if she tried to hit me with a car and forced me to defend myself. Nobody wants to have to shoot somebody. I mean, sure, there are probably some psychopaths out there, but nobody wants to have to do that. Having been put in the position, situation, I was going to say situation and position. Having been put in the position where I've nearly needed to defend myself or defend my family, I was not happy about it either. I probably said some awful things. Because I didn't want to have to do it. It pissed me off that somebody put me in that position. I'm not mad that he said fucking bitch. I'm not. He was a fucking bitch. Anyway, maybe she should have been home with her kids. Moving on to the actual story at hand here. This gentleman who was going on to a promising career. He was accepted into Budge training and would likely be a Navy SEAL right now. That is the caliber of gentleman that we are about to discuss. Just to be clear. Federal inmate number 95252-509. Patrick Tate Adamiak He's starting his third year of his 20-year sentence behind bars at the decrepit prison in Fort Dix, New Jersey. I'm going to switch over here rather than read that. I'm going to switch over to the full story, because this is an extremely big deal, and we need to make a lot of noise about this very quickly. And it's another reason we need to get the GOP, as useless as they are, a complete and full 60-plus person majority in the House and Senate. I understand it's not 60 people in the House, but we need to give them a complete majority in the House and a 60-seat majority in the Senate, so that there are zero excuses. Anything that we demand passed can and will be passed. It must happen, or we're screwed. Look at the Scotus ruling today. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Despite his lengthy federal sentence, Adamiak did nothing wrong. In fact, the government even admits he did nothing wrong. He broke no laws or ATF regulations, and this is the important thing right here. This is extremely important. The more than 30 stories we have written about his federal charges have proven that. Adamiak's appellate attorney, Matt LaRosiere, I'm just going to call him Matt. His lawyer, Matt, is enraged. Tate did absolutely nothing wrong aside from exercising his rights, and not even his Second Amendment rights, Matt said Monday. Apparently, the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration, ratifies pushing people for engaging in lawful commerce. Adamiak has a sentencing hearing scheduled in June. Nothing is happening here, Matt said. The government is still holding fast to their, quote, "we want to kill this guy" attitude. We still need to file a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court, and within 45 days, it will be filed. Matt does not think much of the government's subtle behind-the-scenes interest in Adamiak's case. It was really disruptive, he said. Words without action really took a lot of effort away from preparing the actual case, chasing empty promises. Biden-era ATF. So if you recall, the Biden-era ATF all of a sudden became the Democrat militant, like the militant wing of the Democrat Party. They started going after any gun store for even the slightest. You forgot to put a period on a form, closed. It was that bad. Especially if you were anti-Biden administration or anti-Democrat administration and pro-2A. Obviously, being a gun store, you have to be pro-2A, but if you were excessively pro-2A, it was even worse on you. They just magically changed these rules, too. There was no law changes. They just magically started enforcing them. And then, of course, you had even worse than that with the ghost guns, the Polymer 80 nonsense, the terrible Scotus ruling that we had on that, which thankfully wasn't as bad as the news made it out to be, but was still a terrible ruling. Anyway, that was just to jog your memory on what was happening with the ATF under Biden. Oh, they did where they magically decided, even though they had decided long ago that braces were acceptable, they just magically decided to make 50 million ARs into SBRs, illegal felony SBRs overnight. Adamiak, who at the time was an active duty Navy E6, was arrested and charged by the ATF during the height of the Biden administration's war on guns, gun owners, gun rights, and the Second Amendment. After ATF agents kicked down his doors, they found nothing illegal or even suspected of being illegal. As a result, the ATF brought in a specialist, ATF Firearm Enforcement Officer Jeffrey R. Bodell, a man that should be in jail. Officer Bodell, you are a piece of shit, and you should be in jail. He discombobulated, I'll explain what that means in a second, the actual items that agents had found, all of which still legally sold online. Most don't even require an ID, and turned them into machine guns and destructive devices. So let's start with this. What is a machine gun and or a destructive device? The 1929 whatever NFA law that, by the way, the Supreme Court originally ruled completely unconstitutional. You know why they changed their mind on that back in 1935? Because FDR threatened to stack the court, and in an effort to preserve the court's legitimacy, the court decided to allow a few laws that they had already ruled unconstitutional to pass. Aside from that, that law defines machine guns, short-barreled rifles, sawn-off shotguns, and quote-unquote destructive devices as requiring a $200 tax stamp, followed by the 1986 machine gun ban law that banned the production of any new machine guns. So you can own any legal machine gun that was produced before, it was 1985 or 1986. I always get the year confused. But you have to get a tax stamp on it, the NFA tax stamp. Now, of course, they've reduced the fee on the tax stamp to $0, but they did not just do away with it as they were supposed to, as we demanded that they do. So, what this means is if you are to assemble a gun that has an overall length under 26 inches, meaning with the stock closed from the end of the stock to the tip of the barrel, or a barrel length itself under 16 inches, no matter what the overall length is, that is a machine gun, meaning it fires more than one bullet per pull of the trigger. That is the legal definition. Or a sawed-off shotgun, which meets roughly the same description as an SBR, roughly. FYI, of course, this is not legal advice. I'm just giving you my opinion of what the law says. All of those things have to be registered with the ATF. A destructive device would be things like grenades, grenade launchers, weapons that shoot something other than a bullet would be a destructive device. There's a lot of things that kind of fall under this definition, but it's essentially the definition of any sort of weapon that fires something, generally speaking, or explodes, that doesn't fall under the category of gun in some way or another. That's more or less what they are. Matter of fact, let's just get the ATF definition here. It's a very broad definition and very unfortunate for many reasons. Any explosive, incendiary, or poison gas device, including bomb, grenade, rocket with propellant charge of more than 4 ounces, missile or projectile with an explosive or incendiary charge, of more than 1/4 ounce, any mine or similar device. B, any weapon other than shotgun or shotgun shell generally recognized as suitable for sporting that expels a projectile via explosive or other propellant, has a bore diameter of greater than 50 caliber or 1/2 inch. Or C, any combination of parts designed or intended to convert a device into a destructive device under A or B, from which a destructive device can be readily assembled. Now, readily assembled has been defined to mean something specific. It's not just whatever you think it means. There is a specific meaning to readily assembled. Devices not designed or redesigned for use as weapons are excluded. Former weapons repurposed for signaling, pyrotechnic, line throwing, safety, or similar non-combat uses, surplus ordnance transferred under 10 U.S.C., antique firearms, rifles intended solely for sporting, recreational, or cultural purposes. And note, the ATF may classify certain devices, example, some pyrotechnic or gas flare guns with anti-personnel ammunition, as destructive devices if they are capable of offensive use, even if originally designed for non-lethal purposes. Consult the ATF for final determinations. Okay, so that's AI's overlay of what the ATF definition of a destructive device is. I want to make sure I was clear on that because it's obviously crucial to this story. There are a lot of things. These laws have been in place for decades. And so for decades, we have established many, when I say we, I just mean the civilian population has established many things that do not fall under those definitions that the Supreme Court has determined are therefore perfectly legal. That is relevant here. That includes things that could theoretically be made into a destructive device, but are not made into a destructive device. It also includes things like old grenades that have been rendered inert, or old munitions that have been rendered inert. Those are not considered destructive devices because they do not have a propelling charge and they do not have an explosive charge anymore. In fact, the military sells old grenades without their explosive charges in them. You can get them at military surplus stores. The problem is, when somebody politicizes and weaponizes the ATF, they can come in and go, looks like a destructive device to me. Despite the fact you bought it legally from the U.S. government, essentially. Keep listening. Give me just 1 second here. Anyway. So they brought in this specialist, and he discombobulated the actual items the agents had found, all of which still legally sold online, and most do not even require an ID, and he turned them into machine guns and destructive devices himself. And so what this also means, you can also buy, if you want to go to FN, who is the company that makes the M249 machine gun. Is it the M240 or the M249? Hang on. I think it's the M249. Fabrique Nationale of Belgium designed both the M240 and the M249. Okay, there you go. You can go to FN and buy an M249. Right now, off the shelf, $10,000. It is just semi-automatic. You cannot buy the fully automatic version. It is a closed bolt semi-automatic instead of an open bolt fully automatic. The difference is meaningless as far as open-closed bolt as far as you are concerned at the moment. Or as far as the law is concerned. But what they did was he essentially had, on the machine gun portion, he essentially had a semi-automatic M249 like this. Now, it wasn't necessarily an M249. I'm just using this as the example. He had a semi-automatic version purchased legally. What Officer POS did, where is he? Jeffrey R. Bodell did, was he converted that semi-automatic to a fully automatic, which FYI can be done to almost any semi-automatic gun. They are mechanical devices. It is not that hard to manipulate them into functioning illegally. And so because these guns were legal and they made a mistake, Officer Jeffrey Bodell decided, well, I can turn it into a machine gun and then we can say it was a machine gun. That is why Bodell should be in prison. They did the same thing with the quote-unquote destructive devices. For example, Adamiak was charged with illegally possessing a machine gun for a toy Sten submachine gun, which looks like this, and a submachine gun is a fully automatic version of a rifle that shoots a pistol caliber, like an MP5. This was a toy of a World War II machine gun. This is the Sten gun right here. And here's the deal. British Sten Mark V display submachine gun. It might have been this very gun right here. This is a great example display prop gun of the British Sten Mark V, made from various real Sten gun parts. The receiver and full bolt are welded into one piece, making the internals non-operational and blocked off as per ATF regulation. The Mark V was a nicer version of the Mark II, featuring a wood stock and a wood pistol grip, bayonet mount, and the Enfield No. 4 front sight. This gun goes back to World War II, actually, not World War I. And as you can see, it is a cheap stamped metal, simple gun. You could make this out of stamped metal. I'm not saying that you can do it legally. I'm just saying it could be made by somebody with basic hand tools and basic skills, fully automatic if they wanted to, in an hour with basic garage hand tools. There's nothing complex on here. In fact, there's probably no welding on here. The most difficult piece to make would be the barrel. Everything else is a simple piece of stamped steel that is shaped into a component. Either way, the ATF has ruled for a long time. You can own these so long as their ability to function has been blocked off, such as through welding. They have very specific definitions on their website that dictate how it must be blocked off, which is why you can buy this gun inoperable as a prop gun. This is very similar. This might be the exact same thing that he had. And they called it a machine gun, even though it was their own rules that dictated that it wasn't. But Officer Piece of Shit converted it into a working machine gun, and so they claimed that he had a machine gun. This is a huge deal because it means you can be a completely law-abiding citizen doing things that are well within the established law, like owning a inoperable version of a historic weapon, and go to jail for 20 fucking years because some piece of shit decided to fabricate evidence. We cannot allow this to stand. He was charged with illegally possessing a machine gun for a toy Sten submachine gun found during the search warrant. He paid $75 for the non-firing Spanish replica, or toy, which was made by the Denix and is still sold online. Let's take a look. They actually have a hyperlink here to the actual gun. So this is what he had. Sten Mark II, 9mm caliber, United Kingdom, 1940, World War II. That's who made it, obviously. Oh, so he had the Mark II version. Authentic replica of this machine gun was born in 1940 when England was alone and threatened by an imminent invasion of Germany. The government was in urgent need to equip their soldiers with a weapon of their own production, thus born the Sten submachine gun, a weapon with debatable design and reliability, but also one of the most easily recognizable of the Second World War, and would end up being used by both airborne troops and special operations forces as resistance to almost all the countries occupied by the Germans. It was used by the forces of the Commonwealth during World War II and the Korean War. Its most notable features were its simple design and low cost of production, similar to the grease gun, which, though, was a far more effective gun. It was used by the forces of the Commonwealth during World War II and the Korean War. The name Sten is an acronym derived from the manufacturer and leading designers of the weapon, the Mayor Reginald Shepard, Harold Turpin, and Enfield. The place where it is located, Royal Arms Factory of London, some 4 million Sten of several versions were produced during the 1940s. The Sten submachine gun used cartridge 9x19, which was a bonus if captured German ammunition, as they could use it. The Sten, this is poorly translated, FYI. The Sten was small and could easily concealable, divided into several parts, and therefore was appreciated for operations of the partisans in Europe. So there you go. Completely legal, inoperable replica. It's actually pretty cool. All right. Bodell inserted a real Sten barrel and receiver, so he changed all of the major functioning components. Let me see if there's a picture of Officer Jeffrey Bodell here. Oh, they blacked out his picture. That's him, apparently. We'll come back to that. All right. Bodell inserted a real Sten barrel and receiver. Neither Bodell nor his assistant could make it fire more than one round at a time, so it would still be legal. Because believe it or not, it's legal to build your own gun. It always has been. There are rules to it. You can't sell that gun once you've built it, but you can legally build your own gun so long as it meets the same rules. It can't be fully automatic and all those things. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Don't use this as legal advice, but from my understanding, it's always been legal, at least federally. So even the gun that they built from the fake gun that he had still could only fire one round, which would still mean it was still legal. Despite their hard work, the toy Sten would not even accept a real magazine. Still, Bodell officially ruled that the toy was a submachine gun. Admiak was charged with the legal possession of 2 destructive devices, 2 inert RPGs that had holes drilled directly into their receivers and were stripped of all internal components. Also legal, also owned by thousands, if not millions, of Americans. There are many collectors out there that own inert versions of these real guns since they cannot legally own the real versions anymore, which, by the way, is absolutely absurd for the freest nation in the world that has a Second Amendment protection. Regardless, they could go after any one of those people that legally owns these based on this. ATF's expert, Bodell, added parts from real RPGs until they would fire a single subcaliber 7.62 by 39 millimeter round. That's an AK-47 round. So it wouldn't even shoot an RPG. So I'm not sure how you could classify it as a destructive device because they actually converted it into a gun. I don't know why, but they did. And it would shoot a single AK round. I could go to Home Depot, buy an appropriate sized tube of steel and another appropriate sized tube of steel that slides over it and make it fire a single round of 7.62 in about 30 seconds. And guess what? Technically, at least federally, that would be legal, according to my understanding. The judge who oversaw Adamiak's trial actually wrote that Adamiak, quote, did not possess all parts of destructive devices, which should have killed the charges. The fake RPG are still legally sold today without an FFL or any other paperwork because it's entirely inoperable. You know what an inoperable RPG launcher is? It's a fucking tube with a piece of wood glued to the bottom as a handle. That's all it is. Allow me to demonstrate. RPG-7. Oh, good lord. Really? Are we going to do this right now? Yes, I'm not a human. Ah, tricked it. It thought I was a human. So this right here is what they're talking about. Just this upper portion. This is the actual rocket right here. It fires, doom. This is the warhead. You can own all of this legally as long as it's inoperable and rendered inoperable. What he had was this part right here, and all of the internal components that make up the trigger were removed. That means that the only thing left was a tube of metal, a handle with no trigger, and I guess a sight. That's it. Adamiak was charged with illegally possessing 4 machine guns, for possessing 4 legal and highly sought after pre-ban open bolt semi-auto pistols and carbines, which are still legally sold today. What does that mean? That means he owned 4 machine guns or machine pistols that were made before 1985 or 1986, whatever the year was. All of which are still legally owned. You can still buy pre-ban fully automatic weapons. NFA weapons. No, what I'm looking for is one of the auctions. You can go and see these auctions, and you can buy this gun yourself. There are many gun stores in the country that deal specifically in pre-ban machine guns. They're very expensive because there's a finite number, of course. But they are completely legal to own. You can see right here, this is a M16 lower. Completely legal. This is a pre-ban Philadelphia Ordnance Receiver 1942 BAR. That's actually pretty cool. NFA demo gun. Here's a Colt AR-15 Sporter 2 fully auto Mac 10, 13 grand. Don't a fuck Mac 10. I can't believe anyone would pay 13 grand for a Mac 10, but you can in fact buy them completely legally. It's just an NFA item. Just like any other short-barreled rifle or anything else. You can buy these Czech, whatever these are, scorpions, completely legally. So he owned 4 legal, fully automatic weapons. Oh, that's cool. So there you go. Here's another Mac 10. So I don't know how they can charge him with illegally possessing those, but they did. And then he was charged with illegally possessing 977 machine guns, or what are known as Mac flats. What these are pieces of steel. Literally. They were nothing more than flat pieces of metal. Fortunately, former ATF senior official Daniel G. O'Kelly testified about these charges and explained the federal rules as they applied to the case. O'Kelly was able to prove that the pieces of stamped metal did not legally qualify as firearm receivers. His testimony saved Adamiak from an additional 10 years in prison. O'Kelly strongly believes that Adamiak should be a free man. The flats are still legally sold without an FFL or any other paperwork, and that's because they are literally just flat pieces of steel that are cut into various pieces that could be assembled into a Mac 10. That's still not against the law. That is the closest thing he has to something that you could suggest was a machine gun. But legally, it's not. So regardless of how you feel about it, the law says that they're not illegal, which is why, thankfully, he ended up not being, they took those charges away because at least some ATF agent had the decency to testify that that wasn't illegal. I don't know why they didn't testify about the other parts, but not my case. Adamiak has been accepted to attend BUDS and would likely be leading a Navy SEAL platoon if the ATF had left him alone or admitted they found nothing illegal in his home. That alone is a massive loss for this country. It also needs to be stressed that today's ATF under President Donald Trump have stopped these types of false arrests. ATF technicians no longer convert commonly sold legal items into machine guns or rocket launchers. However, even though today's ATF agents are 100% aware of Adamiak's horrific legal situation that their own agency caused, he remains behind bars. Adamiak spends his days like any other federal inmate. However, there's one massive difference. The entire prison system knows he's not guilty of committing a single crime. His imprisonment hasn't really affected his attitude, at least not yet. He remains incredibly polite and keeps himself in high spirits, or at least that's how he wants to be perceived, especially by his dad and brother. His mother died shortly after his arrest. He had hoped that President Trump, or those that he had put in charge of the federal agencies like ATF, would notice his innocence and act. But so far, nothing substantive has materialized. Adamiak remains federal inmate number 95252-509. There have been some changes at the ATF since Trump was elected. The agency has taken some positive, albeit small steps. Unfortunately, none of it matters because Adamiak is still behind bars. The new leadership wants their agency to be viewed as a real federal law enforcement agency. They must clean up the mess left by the previous administration. Its victims, like Adamiak, cannot be left to rot in prison, and they most certainly cannot be ignored. I did nothing wrong, I broke no laws, but I have 17 more years to spend in prison. I hope the new administration takes a look at what actually happened here and reviews the evidence and does the right thing. Not asking for anything special. Nothing I owned was illegal. I should not be in prison. And to be clear, he should not get a pardon. His sentence should be entirely commuted because he never should have been in prison. I'm going to put his picture up for just a second here. This is a soldier that was accepted into Bud's training. And this matters for each and every 2A advocate, no matter if you are really that big on guns or not. And the reason why it matters is because it means that under a different authority, the ATF at any time could locate just about any benign piece of metal or firearm that is perfectly legal in your home and charge you as if it were an illegal item. As long as they can convince themselves that they can convert it into an illegal item, that's apparently good enough. Doesn't matter that you didn't convert it. Doesn't matter that they are the ones that committed a felony by converting it. You could go to prison because they found a piece of metal in your home. It means that they can weaponize the laws against you anytime for any reason, no matter if you've never broken the law. Conservatives often don't get riled up about much. They should be about this. This is the case of the government literally making up charges out of thin air and targeting somebody that they apparently didn't like for whatever reason and making him a criminal despite the fact he had never broken the law. They could do the same to you. Do you own a Ruger 1022? An AK, an AR, any semi-automatic weapon essentially, a Glock? All of those can be easily converted to a fully automatic weapon. Any semi-automatic rifle essentially, or pistol, could be converted. To varying degrees of difficulty, they are all mechanical devices. They all operate on simple mechanical principles, and theoretically, any one of them could be converted. And so if you own any semi-automatic weapon, the ATF would be able to do exactly the same thing to you. Let me ask you this. Do you have a piece of metal pipe in your house? Piece of sheet steel laying around? They could charge you. This cannot just be left to the wayside. This is a huge deal. And this is a big oversight in laws like the NFA, as well as some other laws that the ATF typically enforces, as well as DEA. DEA and ATF both. They both have laws where they can essentially apply them to anything. Anybody, any house in America has a piece of metal pipe or sheet steel laying around. Even if it's being used to put water into your sink. The jury's not going to know that when it's laying on the table in front of them, are they? And whose word are they going to take for it? This is a big problem with these types of laws. If they want to charge you, there are dozens of items in your house right now that, if they say you are going to use them for nefarious purpose, suddenly become materials for making a machine gun or a destructive device or whatever else. It cannot be left to stand. Or it means that the federal government can pursue anyone they want, anytime, for any reason, and just lie. And this Officer Bodell needs to be in prison for exactly the amount of time. If Adamiak is the only person he ever did this to, then he should be in jail for 20 years. If he's done this to other people, he's converted other completely legal items that they had and then testified that that person actually had done that, then he should be in jail for all of those charges. I'll share this story on my X page, x.com/JBU_show. Please share it. I ask you guys all the time, please like, follow, show, all that. Not even going to ask you to do that this time. Please share this story and get it out there and be upset about it. Because it is a big deal. Just because the ATF's not doing this right now does not mean they will not go immediately back to doing the same thing. There are many people that work in the DEA, that work in the FBI, that work in the ATF that would love to put anybody behind bars that they feel like. I don't know why that is. I just know it is. I just know that these people believe that they have the right to play with these toys, but you don't. You are too stupid. It does not matter if you weren't playing with those toys. The fact that you support people that do is bad enough. The fact that you support the right that supports the people that do is bad enough. Go ahead and share that right now so I don't forget. All right. Let's move on. How do you move on from that? Let's move on to the next story here. Oh, yeah. This is a real lovely juxtaposition, too. So, you have a kid that was accepted into Bud's training. He was an E6 in the Navy. He's in prison for 20 years. These dumbass kids. Nothing. They're recording their crimes. Nothing. I wonder how many of these kids have illegal parents. I can tell you this. Me and my friends like to race our cars when we were in high school. We like to do stupid stuff. We never would have considered interrupting thousands of people's commute home to do some donuts in the middle of the freeway. We would have waited and done it at midnight when nobody was out there. We would go to back roads where there wouldn't be a chance, and we'd shut the road down on both sides, so there wouldn't be a chance of accidentally killing somebody. We would actually put just the slightest amount of thought into it because we weren't trying to hurt anybody else. We were just trying to have fun. That's entirely different from kids like this who are trying to disrupt other people. And look, they're kids. I'm not saying that they should be thrown in jail for the rest of their life. But these kids should damn sure be in jail over an E6 Navy man. I don't know what E6 is, so I can't call him by his appropriate title. Let's see. I know, people are probably yelling at the screen right now. Petty Officer First Class of the Navy, who was accepted into budge training for legally owning a firearm. I know that for sure. And look, I've been defending ICE agents a lot lately. I defend officers a lot. But at a certain point, guys, when you contribute to a system where kids like that, people like that, get to run around and do whatever they want, and the only people we ever see getting in trouble are law-abiding citizens doing things that are causing no harm to anybody else. There's no accusation that Petty Officer First Class Adamiak was stockpiling weapons to harm people. At worst, he was probably just going to shoot him for his own amusement. If he had ever planned on assembling them in the first place. And so, when we see over and over and over law-abiding citizens getting screwed for trying to follow the law and doing things that cause no harm to anybody else, but then people who have no regard for anybody else at all and live their entire lives at the consequence of everybody else. And I understand your hands are tied too. I get it. But if they're going to tie your hands, then you should tie your own hands from harassing law-abiding citizens. Because at a certain point, you become the bad guy. And I don't want to see that. I've fought against it actively for months, years now, on this podcast. But when I go from a story like that to a video like that, fuck does it make it hard. And if you have any shred of honesty in you, you'll understand why. Is your job to protect the people or to serve the elites in government? You have to decide. And you have to decide whether your conscience is worth more than your paycheck. Unfortunately, when you didn't stand up for your fellow officers that didn't want to get vaccinated, if you live in or if you work in a department that fired anybody that refused, you probably have already decided your paycheck's more important. It makes it hard for even those of us who are naturally inclined to defend you to stand up for you over and over and over again. Now, on the same side, or the other side of the same coin, or whatever, however you want to say it, to those out there that are angry because of everything I just explained, understand that winning hearts and minds does matter. whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about, police-citizen relationships. And the more you push police officers as us versus them, the more you push them into that corner, the more they're going to choose each other and see themselves as separate from the society that they live in. And the same goes for leftists, for example. The more we treat them all the same, and trust me, there's plenty that fall under the category of would rather see you dead, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you got to respect people that don't respect you. But there are many that don't fall under that category, but are more convinced by that side than this side. By treating them all the same, you just push those people farther away. The goal should be to obtain every common sense voter on the left, every common sense officer in police forces into our camp. The goal should be to bring them in, not push them out. Because otherwise, the faction gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there just becomes more and more factions until finally war breaks out. Fights break out, I should say. Not war. Fights. That's not good for anybody. Now, that said, again, I will also point out that every other agent at the ATF that works with Officer Godell and hasn't spoke up against him, hasn't told him he's a piece of shit to his face, you're harboring a fugitive. That's how you'd treat it if it was one of us. I don't see why we would treat it any different for you. His lies put an innocent man in jail. He should come to work every day, hated by everybody he works with. If you maintain any credibility at all. All right. Unfortunately, I would like, normally when we have to talk about heavy stuff like that, I like to try and transition into something a little less heavy. Unfortunately, it's pretty much all bad news on this Friday. So yeah, I don't have a lot of great news. We can talk about aliens real quick, I guess. That's one option. Or let's listen to Macron real quick. Let's just go to something that's foreign so that we don't have to be as angry about it. Here you go.
Because, free speech is a pure bullshit if nobody knows how you are guided through this so-called free speech, especially when it's to be guided from one hated speech to another hated speech. I just want to have a transparent road through these different speeches, and I want, by the way, to have a sort of public order. I want to avoid racist speech, hated speech, and so on. This is my... And the third one...
I'm going to listen to this again. Hard to tell what he's saying.
Because, free speech is a pure bullshit if nobody knows how you are guided through this so-called free speech, especially when it's to be guided from one hated speech to another hated speech. I just want to have a transparent road through these different speeches, and I want, by the way, to have a sort of public order. I want to avoid racist speech, hated speech, and so on. This is my... And the third one... Because, free speech is a pure bullshit if nobody knows how you are guided through this so-called free speech, especially when it's to be guided from one hated speech to another hated speech.
You heard him, guys. He just wants pubic order.
I just want to have a transparent road through these different speeches, and I want, by the way, to have a sort of public order. I want to avoid racist speech, hated speech.
There you have it. Free speech is bullshit. As he, speaks his mind freely. You hear how many people clap, though? That's
Because, free speech is a pure bullshit if nobody knows.
By the way, did you notice that this is the French president, Macron? Not French. Not French. Not French. Not French. Not French. Yeah. Call it whatever you want. Leftism is going to destroy this planet. That is for sure. It's already destroyed Europe, but let's talk about, since we are kind of into this deep stuff anyway, now would be a good time to talk about this. Let's talk about ourselves for just a second here. Unfortunately, a lot of our understanding about life and about ourselves has been lost in the last 25 years. I don't know why, but it has. It seems like the more and more we learn, the dumber and dumber we get, in a sense. Especially regarding a lot of things, but especially regarding the way that we interact with each other. True power, as far as power in yourself, is being able not just to recognize and utilize your strengths, but especially your weaknesses. And that sounds like a cheesy bumper sticker, but just hear me out for a second. Be able to admit those weaknesses, to understand those weaknesses, and to be able to recognize that you can't overcome some of them, but you can adapt to them. And as long as you know that they are there, you can even utilize them to a sense. You have to know them better than the people that wish to use them against you. And that could be friends or family, and not in a nihilistic sense, but just in an emotionally manipulative sense. And they might not even be consciously doing it. But we all use our knowledge of others to our advantage, whether we realize we're doing it or not. Most people, they don't take much time to investigate themselves. And so, while it's easy to say you need to be able to recognize your strengths and your weaknesses, most people just assume they have no weaknesses. They don't ever take the time to think about, okay, why do I think differently than the next person? What makes my thought process and my person different from somebody else? It's been my experience personally that very few people ever look introspectively. Very few people ever pay attention or recognize the differences in two different people, for example. They don't think about, why is this person responding to me this way? They just deal with the way that person is responding. So if you do something that makes your girlfriend mad, for example, instead of being able to step back and think, okay, why is she actually mad? What about her thought process brought her to the point of being mad about this, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Instead of just, well, she's mad at me, so I'm mad at her, right? Or instead of just dealing with the anger itself, trying to understand what about her brought her to anger in something you didn't think would make her angry. And this obviously applies beyond just your personal relationship with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever, but I'm just using that as an example. But beyond just your friends and family, using your strengths and weaknesses against you, your enemies are going to too. And no matter how much you think you're liked by people, you have enemies. Sometimes people that you've never done anything wrong to. I had a woman one time whom I had never crossed in any way, shape, or form and had only tried to help literally as much as I could. I didn't have anything to offer, really, but she ended up screwing me worse than almost anybody else I can think of in my life. I can think of a couple. But in this particular situation, this woman who I had barely even met and offered to help, having barely even met her, went out of her way to screw me. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why. It just didn't make sense. Well, it turns out it was really simple why. She just wanted what I had, and all she had to do was get rid of me to get it. In this case, it was a specific apartment. It was that simple. She had no problem destroying my life over something I never did. For an apartment. And no, this wasn't anybody I dated or anything. This was a work thing, but if I would have been able to, at that moment, understand what her actual motivations were, understand what my own weaknesses were, my blind spots, for example, in that case, I probably could have stopped it. I probably could have prevented it from happening. But I was young and I was dumb. You can't do this alone. You will never be able to understand yourself to the level required without deep interpersonal relationships. And that means friendships. That means relationships with your family, if you have any. And it means, of course, with your significant other, whoever that may be to you. This is why I have always said, you can live a happy life without getting married, for example. But you cannot achieve a certain level of personal happiness and satisfaction without it. You can live a perfectly happy life without having a child, but there is a level of happiness and satisfaction that you cannot achieve without having a child. I know a lot of people hate it when I say that. I know a lot of people out there probably shouldn't have kids, at least not without a lot of personal growth first. But that's just the facts. And it's something that I would have rolled my eyes at too until I had a child and realized all of the ways in which you change when you do. And again, it's not that you can't have a happy life without one. But there is a certain level that you unlock that you can't even recognize exists, except for very few can, until you do. As for whether or not that can be done through adopting and other things for people that can't have a child, I would imagine so. I don't think it necessarily has to be a particular way, but it is the process of having somebody that is entirely yours and solely dependent on you. It is a natural process that we are naturally inclined to adapt to, that we are literally designed to create and adapt to. And so in order to, because you're never going to be able to, when it comes to recognizing your own flaws and your own weaknesses and strengths, you're just simply not going to be able to see all of them yourself. You need people that are close enough to you that can recognize them and are honest enough to tell you. And I've said this over and over and over. I talk about credibility and I talk about honesty because they're one and the same thing all the time. The best decision I ever made was to live my life honestly. Admit when I do things wrong, especially when I do things wrong. When I fail, not tell white lies that will make my life easier, that don't seem to have any meaning. To tell the truth when something's bothering me. These things are very hard for all of us. But when you have absolutely no secrets, no lies, nothing that you are worried about anybody finding out ever, there's nothing that anybody can ever use against you. There's nothing that can keep you awake at night. It is a type of freedom that cannot be achieved any other way. And it's a type of freedom that I think people naturally yearn for. And so the farther and farther away you get from it, the angrier and angrier you get. And you don't realize why necessarily. But it's fucking tiring to have secrets, to have worries, to have things that keep you up at night. Because you know you should have done this, but you did this instead. Because you know you should have said this, but you didn't. Because this person is really taking advantage of you, but you just, it's too hard to say anything about it. Because you like them, you love them even. But you don't want the fight. You don't want you're afraid of what comes from being honest about it. All of those little things, they add up. True power is in that truth and honesty. Recognizing it, understanding it, and most importantly, accepting it. And that is the hardest thing. Accepting what your weaknesses are is by far the hardest part. And it's the part that most people can't get to. Because you usually have people, either people that hate you or people that like you, that will point out your weaknesses to you. But most people will refuse to accept it. They'll write it off because the person that told them hates them. And that's why deep interpersonal relationships are necessary, because you're not going to take the word of somebody that hates you, right? Even though they might be right about that particular thing. The people that seek to manipulate, they hate people. So these would be narcissists, right? Psychopaths. People that operate within those two spectrums. We're all narcissistic to some degree. I don't know that we're all psychopathic to some degree, but there's obviously a wide range. You know, as much as we hate talking about gender spectrum because it's nonsense, there is a spectrum as far as narcissism and psychopathy and all of these things. And we all have to be narcissists to some degree. I mean, it's necessary for survival, right? But there is a reason that there is a large portion of the Bible dedicated to these things, to recognizing these things and to weeding them out of yourself. And so those people that do seek to manipulate people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or consciously or unconsciously, they really hate people. They hate people that operate in total transparency. And they tend to shy away from them. And the reason for that is strange. And it's also simple. The simple part is because there is no weakness there. There's no angle for manipulation, and there's nothing to use against you. And so they move on to somebody that they can manipulate, that they can rely on their anger or their hatred or their sadness or whatever it is weak about them to get what they are looking for out of them. My mother, for example. Sorry, Mom, for saying this publicly, but it's a good example. Has a deep regret over decisions she made when me and my sister were growing up. And for a long time, I would use that to get things that I needed out of my mother, that I needed from her. I still could if I wanted to. I know somebody that still does. But everybody has those things. Whether you had a child that died or a parent that died, just a major regret of some sort, a regret over nothing specific even, just a lot of little things. A lot of times when you should have done something that you knew you should have done, but you didn't do. Those are all weaknesses. Those are all things that can be weaponized against you and probably are, whether consciously or not. And so when you are able to recognize those things of yourself and truly operate transparently, the people that seek to manipulate you, they hate it. And it becomes harder to find people that you can operate transparently with. Because most people just live in their bubble. And I don't mean their political bubble. I mean their happiness bubble. And they don't like people that are honest. Not in that way. Even more important, though, it has a peculiar effect on even the worst people. Because when you truly are a good person, a honest and transparent person, it forces good out of others. And that's part of what people hate about it. Good people who live in a bubble but are still, they want to be good people, they don't necessarily hate it, but they tend to shy away from it. But people that are trying to be bad, people that are bad, they hate it because they can't stop it. When you are a honest and good and transparent person, people immediately seek to live up to that standard around you because they recognize it immediately, whether consciously or not. They recognize it, and they immediately try to live up to that standard. But bad people hate it because they can't help it. And I don't know why that is. I just know that it is. The most psychopath person can be brought down only by somebody that is an honest person that operates in total transparency. It's their only weakness, essentially, because there is nothing that they can use to manipulate you. And that is why it is the ultimate power. If and when I figure out a surefire way to get there, I'll be sure to let you know. It's not that easy. Not as easy as I just laid out, but it is possible. Anyway, let's see, what do we got here? Still got to talk about the tariffs. There was apparently a potential terror attack. Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to the tariffs, I guess. Let's get that out of the way. All right. Matter of fact, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about how Scotus has sold us out. All right, guys, let's get back into it. All right. So today, the Supreme Court has struck down the tariffs used by the president. Now, as a firm constitutionalist, I can appreciate the argument that they're making, but there's a bigger problem here. For one, this entirely sells us out to basically every other nation on the planet. Because what they've essentially said is that every other nation can tariff us, can prevent buying, can stop their people from buying American goods, but we cannot tariff them in return. Not without Congress. But the problem is, Congress has been a stalemate for 40 years, essentially. They haven't been able to come together on anything. Except for paying themselves, of course. And worse than that is the Supreme Court has been incredibly partisan since the 1970s until the current Supreme Court. And yes, I know leftists like to say that this is the most Republican or conservative Supreme Court we've ever had. They're entirely ridiculous justices. It's not true. Harvard, I think it's Harvard or Yale, but I'm pretty sure it's Harvard. I've looked at the numbers many times, so I'm not going to pull them back up right now, but I can tell you, they keep track of every single decision that Scotuses make. And they keep track of how many times conservatives side with liberals and vice versa, how many times each justice sides with another justice. This is the most, the 5 conservatives that are on the court right now, and there's 3 activist liberals that are living constitutionalists, which literally means we can invent any meaning we want out of the Constitution. Those 5 conservatives are some of the most balanced justices to ever sit on the court. They side with their liberal counterparts around 40 to 50% of the time, depending on which one of them specifically we are talking about. The liberals, on the other hand, they side with each other between 70 and 90% of the time. So while all of the conservative justices, except for the most conservative, which is, not Alito, Thomas, he's about 70% with conservatives, or with Alito, I think. Not necessarily all of the conservatives, but he's about 70% with another conservative. But they're, other than him, they are all about 50 or 60% siding with each other, 40 or 50% siding with the other side. All of the liberals are 70 to 90% siding with each other. 70 to 90%. The numbers are clear. This is one of the fairest Supreme Courts we have ever had. And that's because there is a conservative majority, not in spite of it. But because that's only existed for the last 5 years? Prior to that, we have had courts that have routinely sided with progressive radical changes, living constitutionalist ideals, meaning they can change what the Constitution says without a constitutional amendment, since the 1970s. And because of that, issuing rulings today that don't balance the fact that they have radically tried to transform the meaning of the Constitution is not a conservative decision. It's just selling us out, selling out Americans in general. Let's go through this. This comes from Scotus blog. In a major ruling on presidential power, the Supreme Court on Friday struck down the sweeping tariffs that President Donald Trump imposed in a series of executive orders. By a 6-3 vote, I know Thomas and Kavanaugh dissented. I'm guessing Alito is the other dissenter. The justices ruled that the tariffs exceeded the powers given to the president by Congress under a 1977 law providing him the authority to regulate commerce during national emergencies created by foreign threats. The court did not weigh, however, on whether or how the federal government should provide refunds to importers who have paid the tariffs. First of all, we shouldn't, because that means that taxpayers would have to now pay again. And that would be absurd. Estimated in 2025 to be more than $200 billion. In his dissenting opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh suggested that the federal government, quote, may be required to refund billions of dollars to importers who paid the IEEPA, that's the law in question, tariffs. Even though some importers may have already passed on the cost to consumers, meaning they didn't spend any money out of pocket, but we're supposed to now give our money again back to the importers. That's absurd, but that's what this decision means. Moreover, he added, because the IEEPA have helped facilitate trade deals worth trillions of dollars, including with foreign nations from China to UK to Japan, the court's decision could generate uncertainty regarding various agreements. That process, too, could be difficult, Kavanaugh warned. The law at the center of the case is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as the IEEPA. I'm just going to call it tariffs at this point, which authorizes the president to use the law to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat which has its source in whole or substantial part outside of the United States to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States, which clearly tariffs fall directly in line with. If the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat, as of course Trump did. A separate provision of the law provides that when there is a national emergency, the president may regulate importation or exportation of property in which any foreign country or a national thereof has any interest. Sounds like you couldn't be describing tariffs more to a T. That dispute that led to Friday's opinion began last year, when Trump issued a series of executive orders imposing the tariffs. One set of tariffs, known as the trafficking tariffs, targeted products from China, Canada, and Mexico, which Trump says have not done enough to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Also true. Another set, known as reciprocal tariffs, imposed an additional tariff of 10% on imports from almost all countries and even higher tariffs on products from dozens of countries. In imposing those tariffs, Trump cited large trade deficits as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and economy of the United States. Lawsuits filed by small businesses in a group of states, all of which say that they are affected by the increased tariffs, were filed in the lower courts, which agreed with the challengers that IEEPA tariffs did not authorize Trump. But those rulings were put on hold, allowing the government to continue to collect the tariffs while the Supreme Court proceeded. In a splintered decision on Friday, the Supreme Court agreed with the challengers that tariffs did not give Trump the power, the tariff law did not give Trump the power to impose the tariffs. Based on two words separated by 16 others in that law, regulate and importation, the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country of any product at any rate for any amount of time. Yeah. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, "Those words," he continued, "cannot bear such weight." Roberts added, "The law contains no reference to tariffs or duties. Moreover, until now, no president has read the IEEPA to confer such power." That's not necessarily true. Just because a former president hasn't decided to do this doesn't mean they didn't read it that way. In a part of the opinion joined by Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, Roberts said that Trump's reliance on that law to impose the tariffs violated the major questions doctrine. The idea that if Congress wants to delegate the power to make decisions of vast economic or political significance, it must do so clearly. In 2023, so far that sounds reasonable. In 2023, the court relied on major questions doctrine to strike down the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness program. In that case, and others like it, Roberts observed, it might have been possible to read the federal law at issue to give the executive branch the power it claimed, but the context, such as the constitutional division of power among the three branches of government and, quote, common sense, suggest Congress would not have delegated highly consequential power through ambiguous language. The point he's making is correct, but to compare this with the Biden law regarding student loan forgiveness is absolutely absurd, because there was no law that could even be remotely construed as to giving the president power to just turn student loans over to taxpayers. Because that's what it was. It wasn't forgiving student loans. It was taxpayers just giving the banks a bailout, essentially. That's entirely different because the IEEPA very clearly and blatantly gives President Trump the power and authority under the case of an emergency, which he declared, to control, as it said before, any economic and foreign policy matters, essentially. Things that tariffs very blatantly fall into the definition of. I'll get more specific on it here in a minute when I go to some of the dissenting opinions, but continuing with this article at the moment, in cases like this one, Roberts continued, in which the Trump administration contends that Congress has delegated to it, quote, the core congressional power of the purse, considerations like context and common sense apply with particular force. If Congress were to relinquish that weapon to another branch, a reasonable interpreter would expect it to do so clearly. And indeed, Roberts said, when Congress has delegated its tariff powers, it has done so in explicit terms and subject to strict limits, a test that Trump's tariffs failed here. The tariff question is indeed one of economic and political significance. Just to clarify what he just said, I will agree that perhaps it would have been reasonable to say, yes, Trump can do this, but it cannot be indefinite. There needs to be specific limits set. Which, to be fair, there kind of were, at least with reciprocal tariffs. The point of reciprocal tariffs was as long as they are tariffing us, we are tariffing them. That was perfectly reasonable, and that sets a fine line that if they remove their tariffs, we remove ours. As far as the fentanyl, that's a little less clear. You should probably set a particular goal for reducing that fentanyl trafficking issue, but the tariff question is indeed one of economic and political significance, Robert added, which also suggested caution before interpreting IEEPA to grant the power that the president seeks. Quoting the Trump administration's brief in the Supreme Court, Roberts noted that, in the president's view, whether we are a rich nation or a poor one hangs in the balance. These stakes dwarf those of other major questions cases. Nor, contrary to the President Trump administration's arguments, does the fact that the law involves an emergency power or foreign affairs preclude the justices from applying the major questions doctrine, according to Roberts. The Supreme Court rejected a similar argument about emergency powers in the student loan forgiveness case. Roberts emphasized that. In fact, he suggested courts should be skeptical of reliance on alleged emergencies to infringe on powers reserved for Congress. Now, that statement is obviously agreeable, but not necessarily appropriately applied. Excuse me. In Congress, rather than the president, has the power to impose tariffs during peacetime, Roberts wrote. The court's 3 Democratic appointees, oh, I can't wait, Sonia Sotomayor, Alana Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, joined another part of Roberts' opinion, holding that Trump's tariffs were also not supported by the text of the law. As an initial matter, Roberts wrote that the IEEPA authorizes the president to investigate, block during the pendency of an investigation, regulate, direct, and compel, nullify, prevent, or prohibit importation or exportation. That list, Roberts stressed, does not include tariffs or duties at all. I'm going to read that again. The law authorizes the president to investigate, block during the pendency of an investigation, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, prevent or prohibit importation and exportation. What is a tariff except a regulation on importation and exportation? According to Roberts, though, that doesn't include tariffs or duties at all. But see, that's a lie. Because, again, a tariff and duty is a direct regulation on importation and exportation. It is a broad term that applies to specific regulations, a number of specific regulations on importation and exportation. They're manipulating the language here to get their outcome. I think because Scotus was a little bit afraid to side with the president once again. Probably because leftists keep threatening to kill them and trying to. There have been more attempts on a Scotus life since President Trump took office than in the last 10 years, probably. All by one side. And yes, they're crazies. I get it. But who do you think they're riling up every time they come out and say Scotus are Nazis? The president is Nazi. ICE is Gestapo. Of course crazies are going to start coming out of the woodwork. An absence, meaning an absence of the word tariff or duty, that is, quote, notable in light of the significant but specific powers Congress did go to the trouble of naming. It stands to reason, according to Roberts, that had Congress intended to convey the distinct and extraordinary power to impose tariffs, it would have done so expressly, as it consistently has in other tariff statutes. The law's use of the words regulate and importation are not enough to give Trump power to impose tariffs, according to Roberts. The U.S. Code is replete with statutes granting the executive the authority to regulate someone or something, yet the government cannot identify any statute in which the power to regulate includes the power to tax. And while tariffs might be defined as a tax, they're very clearly not a tax. Like, yes, we call them a tax because fundamentally it's the same thing as far as the end user, us, is concerned. But even the founders were not argued, rather, that during the Tea Party, the original Tea Party, where they dumped all the tea into Boston Harbor, they were arguing against the tax that was imposed on the tea for colonists. But even in arguing against that tax, they acknowledged that the tariff, not the tax, the additional tax, but the tariff itself imposed by Britain was legitimate. Weird. My point in saying that is that his change in the language right there from tariff to the power to tax is very telling. Indeed, Roberts added, interpreting the word regulate in the law to include the power to tax would render the law partly unconstitutional because it gives the president the power to regulate importation or exportation, but the Constitution specifically bars taxes on exports. but not tariffs. We used to have all kinds of tariffs on exports. That's a nonsense statement. Roberts observed that Trump's interpretation of the law would give the president power to unilaterally impose unbounded tariffs, unconstrained. Well, no, it wouldn't. He just said only in an emergency, unconstrained by the significant procedural limitations in the other tariff statutes, and free to issue a dizzying array of modifications at will, as long as he declares an emergency, a determination that, Roberts added, courts would not be able to review. Such an interpretation, Roberts said, would represent a transformative expansion of the president's authority over tariff policy and, indeed, over the broader economy. Finally, Roberts concluded by emphasizing that we claim no special competence in matters of economics or foreign affairs. We claim only, as we must, the limited role assigned to us by the Article 3 of the Constitution. Fulfilling that role, we hold that the IEEPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. In his 63-page dissent, Kavanaugh acknowledged that the tariffs have generated vigorous policy debates, but such debates, he said, are not for the federal judiciary to resolve. Rather, the judiciary's more limited role is to neutrally interpret and apply the law. In Kavanaugh's view, Trump had the authority under the law to impose the tariffs because they are a traditional and common tool to regulate importation. The major questions doctrine, Kavanaugh argued, did not bar Trump from imposing the tariffs. To the contrary, he suggested, under the major questions doctrine, as the court has applied it, this should be a straightforward case in favor of the president. First, he contended the text of the law, long-standing historical practice, and relevant Supreme Court precedents all indicate that Congress clearly intended EPA to give the president sweeping powers to impose tariffs. Moreover, he argued, in cases involving foreign affairs, courts read the statute as written and do not employ the major questions doctrine as a thumb on the scale against the president. Although I firmly disagree with the court's holding today, the decision might not substantially constrain the president's ability to order tariffs going forward, Kavanaugh wrote, because numerous other federal statutes authorize the president to impose tariffs and might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs at issue in this case. I hope that's true, albeit perhaps with a few additional procedural steps that EPA as an emergency statute does not require. EPA! Justice Neil Gorsuch joined Roberts' opinion, but he wrote a specific 46-page concurring opinion, more than twice as long as Roberts' opinion, in which he addressed and criticized this. This is an extremely unique Scotus decision. It's 170 pages, and it's unique because virtually every single justice wrote either a concurring or dissenting opinion. Almost every single one of them, if not every single one. I didn't see one from Comey Barrett, but I did see a concurring or dissenting opinion from each of the rest of the justices. And that's unique. That rarely happens. Usually, every justice will just sign on to either the concurring opinion or the dissenting opinion. And maybe you'll get like one or two, I concur, but only with this part or whatever, and then like someone else signs on to that. But you rarely will get almost every single justice or every single justice putting in their own 2 cents on it, which tells you this is not nearly as straightforward as they're trying to make it sound. It tells me that they're bending over backwards, actually, to rule against the president, because I personally believe that they were just afraid to rule with the president again. He wrote a separate 46-page concurring opinion in which he addressed and criticized the various arguments made by his colleagues in their separate opinions. For example, he called out Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson for arguing in previous cases involving major questions doctrine. The broad statutory language granting powers to executive officials should be read for all it is worth. Because that's what they do. That's what they always do if it's a Democrat. But if it's a conservative, all of a sudden, they're all about exactly what's written again. I'm glad he called that out at least and put it on record. Involving major questions, broad statutory language should be read for all it's worth, while adopting a more constrained approach to EPA's similarly broad language granting powers to the president. And he pushed back against any suggestion that the doctrine is a recent creation, arguing instead that much the same principle has long applied to those who claim extraordinary delegated authority, whether in private or in public law. He also expressed doubts about Barrett's contention, outlined in her own separate, every single one. Outlined in her own separate concurring opinion. That courts should think of the major questions doctrine not as a canon of statutory interpretation based on the constitutional division of powers between the branches of government, but instead as simply applying common sense to arrive at the most natural reading of the statute. But, quote, common sense not only fails to explain many of the major questions of the case, Gorsuch wrote, it doesn't explain even some of the cases Justice Barrett has held up as examples of common sense cases. I need to read his opinion so I can tell you guys how he can make all these arguments and still come to a concurring opinion. Gorsuch also pushed back against his dissenting colleagues, Kavanaugh, joined by Justices Thomas and Alito. Although he called Kavanaugh's arguments thoughtful and meriting careful consideration, he concluded that the central question in any major questions case remains whether the executive branch claim to an extraordinary power is supported by clear statutory authority. And, as the Roberts opinion explains at length, many additional clues beyond those the dissent addresses confirm that the president cannot meet the standard in this case, even if there were an exception to the major questions doctrine for cases involving foreign affairs, as stressed by the dissent. Gorsuch continued. None of this is relevant here because the president relies entirely on power derived from Congress. It's a good point. I'm also very interested in Kavanaugh's. I will read through these. I'll try to read through them tonight, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch in particular, because I'm interested in Kavanaugh's point that the president may still completely have the power to issue the tariffs. If that's the case, then this decision is not quite such a big deal. If it's not the case, this is a terrible decision that's going to screw us. Because like I said, it means that every other country on earth can tariff our products to prevent U.S. manufacturers from being competitive in the world market, but we can't do anything to protect our own manufacturers. That cannot be allowed to stand. It can't. In response to this, Trump has since issued a change to the tariffs rules. He kind of had to. Sorry, I'm trying to find it here. Trump announces new 10% global tariffs. Let's see. Trump has said he signed an order imposing a 10% tariff on all imports. Donald Trump has announced on his social media platform that he has signed an order to impose tariffs on every nation, although he made no reference to what legal authority he was relying on to do so. It was my great honor to have just signed from the Oval Office a global 10% tariff on all countries, which will be effective almost immediately, the president noted. And so I think what he's doing here, if I'm just to guess, is that rather than using the emergency powers under EPA, he's just issuing a flat 10% tariff to protect American manufacturing so that nowhere is being targeted specifically. It's just a general rule issued by the president. Maybe, just maybe, he's doing this while they sort out how they can legally move forward, because even though this straightforward might not work super applicably, now it has to go through the courts at least before it can be overturned. That might be why, but it is my... I already read that. Minutes later, the White House released a fact sheet explaining that Trump had signed a proclamation invoking his authority under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 to impose a temporary import duty. Well, there you go. Last year, Congressional Research Service, which provides legislative research and analysis to lawmakers, explained that temporary legal authority, or Section 122 of the Trade Act, directs the president to take measures that may include a temporary import surcharge, a tariff, when necessary to address large and serious United States balance of payments deficits or certain other situations that present, quote, fundamental international payments problems. Section 122 has never been used and therefore courts have had no occasion to interpret its language. Some news reports have noted this provision appears to authorize the president to impose across-the-board tariffs on imports in some circumstances. The law does, however, place limits on such tariffs, which may be imposed by the president for a period not exceeding 150 days and are not to exceed 15%. I wonder why I didn't just go to 15%, just to, I guess just not to penalize anybody that was only at 10%, because a lot of our allies, we only tariff to 10%. So maybe that's why, because he had to choose one number. So he just went with the lowest, but yeah, I mean, they're buying time with it. That's what it is. So there you have it. Like I said, I will dig into this. Normally we do a much deeper dive on Supreme Court decisions, but I didn't have a chance to before I got on the air today on this one. I will read here just a brief paragraph out of Justice Thomas's dissenting opinion. He says, I join Justice Kavanaugh's principal dissent in full. As he explains, the court's decision today cannot be justified as a matter of statutory interpretation. Congress authorized the president to relegate importation. Throughout American history, the authority to regulate importation has been understood to include the authority to impose duties on imports. The meaning of that phrase was beyond doubt by the time Congress enacted this statute. Shortly after President Nixon's highly publicized tariffs on imports were upheld based on identical language. The statute that the president relied on therefore authorized him to impose duties on imports at issue in these cases. Justice Kavanaugh makes clear that the court errs in concluding otherwise. He goes on to state that he writes separately to explain why the statute at issue here is consistent with the separation of powers as an original matter. Neither clause prohibits Congress from delegating other kinds of power to the president, because the Constitution assigns Congress many powers that do not implicate the non-delegation doctrine. Congress may delegate the exercise of many powers to the president. Congress has done so repeatedly since the founding with the court's blessing. The power to impose duties on imports can be delegated. At the founding, the power was regarded as one of many powers over foreign commerce that could be delegated to the president. To back up his claim that the power to impose tariffs on imports can be delegated, this is what he says. I refer to charges on imported goods as duties, not tariffs or taxes. When the government charged money for importing goods, that charge was historically called a custom or an impost, each of which was a kind of duty. A Compendus Dictionary of the English Language in 1806, the word tariff primarily referred to the schedule or table listing, or the table that listed such duties, not the duties themselves. Webster's Dictionary, the word tax, although sometimes used loosely to refer to all kinds of monetary charges, more often excluded duties on imports. What the Constitution means by duties, imposts, and excises, and taxes. I misread that. Hold on. Webster's Compendus Dictionary. The word tax altogether sometimes used loosely to refer to all kinds of monetary charges, more often excluded duties on imports. what the Constitution means. Maybe I think what he means is this is what the Constitution means by duties, imposts, and excises and taxes, direct or otherwise. Okay. In fact, although colonial Americans staunchly contested efforts by Parliament to tax them, this goes to what I was saying earlier, they often conceded the authority of the British government to regulate commerce through financial exactions, including prohibitory tariffs. In the most widely read and universally approved response to the Stamp Act by E. Morgan and H. Morgan, the Stamp Act Crisis 71, 1953, Daniel Delaney wrote, quote, "A right to impose an internal tax on the colonies without their consent for the single purpose of revenue is denied. A right to regulate their trade without their consent is admitted. The imposition of a duty may in some instances be the proper regulation. Considerations on the propriety of imposing taxes in the British colonies." Likewise, Benjamin Franklin famously conceded Britain's right of laying duties to regulate commerce, but rejected its power to lay internal taxes. That, of course, is correct. So there's no question that they saw tariffs and taxes as two blatantly separate things. All right. How long we been going here, guys? 2 hours. All right. So you guys let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, follow the show at Rumble. JBU.Show on Rumble or x.com/JBU_show. You can send me an email directly, jbu@usa.com, and let me know what you think, or just leave a comment below. Was this a good ruling? My constitutionalist side kind of wants to appreciate anytime they restrict the president. But the fact is, Scotus has been allowing progressive presidents to do whatever they want, essentially. Remember, under Obamacare, they flat out said that the law is unconstitutional. But instead of repealing the law as they were obligated to do by the Constitution, they allowed them to change the unconstitutional provisions instead. It's something that was never done before. And so that's why it's really annoying that anytime it is a conservative president, they read it as narrowly as possible. And that's why I appreciate Gorsuch calling out Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson, because that is exactly what they do every single time. If it has to do with Trump, they read it as narrowly as human possible. But if it has to do with the progressive president, they tend to interpret it as loosely as could possibly be interpreted. The fact is, the laws say what they say, and they don't say what they don't say. And this idea that we can interpret any meaning we want out of them, or don't want out of them, is absurd. Our country is only 250 years old. As such, every single law that has ever been passed, we have on the record, as well as off the record in many private publications, the words of the people that wrote the laws that describe exactly what they meant and exactly what they didn't mean usually. And so anytime they try to inject these ambiguities that don't exist, it's frustrating to say the least. I'll give you an example. With the Second Amendment, progressives tried to inject the ambiguity that a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They tried to inject the ambiguity that a well-regulated militia implies that the Second Amendment was only meant to apply to the National Guard and not to individuals. That's obviously not true, since it has always applied to individuals. But it's also obviously not true because the word regulation did not mean what it means today. We have dictionaries from 1776. Regulated as referring to a militia or a military at the time meant well-trained and well-armed, well-appointed, meaning well-armed, to put it in its most simple terms. That's what well-regulated mean. A well-regulated, a well-armed and trained militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We also have thousands of texts that back up that what the Founding Fathers meant by the Second Amendment was that every able-bodied man, woman, and child in America had the right to firearms for self-defense. And they actually didn't specify firearms either. They said arms, meaning any equipment used in battle. Now, Scotus has since defined it to mean any bearable arms, meaning something you can physically hold. So a rifle, a sword, that would include a rocket launcher, technically, and should be. But they basically say anything beyond that, tanks, etc., are not included. We know that's not true, though. And thankfully, they didn't limit it to just that. They just said it clearly means at least that. And so that's kind of what it's been limited to so far. But they could go on further to say, well, clearly that's not what they meant. It actually means everything, because it clearly did. I always cite, there is a letter that was written by a merchant back in 1780s. Or I might have even been the 1770s. And his ships were getting attacked by pirates. And so he wrote to, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, but it might have been George Washington. For some reason, I'm thinking Washington at the moment. And said, does the Second Amendment mean I can put cannons on my ship without permission from the government? And Jefferson essentially wrote him back and said, duh. What he actually said was, no, what the Second Amendment means is we can't stop you from putting whatever defense means you want on your ship. That's what it means. Because that is what it means. They are rules that constrain the government, not that constrain us. They are, in fact, unlimited. By definition. And all the ambiguity that it's been injected into all of those rights in the Bill of Rights is all just made up, because the words of the people that wrote them are very clear. The 14th Amendment with immigration is another example, where they claim that the 14th Amendment means that constitutional rights apply to anybody that is inside of the bounds of the United States because of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And again, today's definition, we think of jurisdiction to mean within the boundaries of. That is not what the people that wrote the 14th Amendment meant, and they said it very clearly. What they meant was people that were legally U.S. citizens, no matter where they were on Earth. They specifically put that in there so that diplomats that were in other countries were still afforded 14th Amendment protections. They did not put it in there to imply that anybody that broke into the country magically gets due process. That's absurd, because it means if Russia invaded tomorrow, we would have to give due process to each and every Russian soldier in order to kick them out of the country. That is obviously crazy and not what they meant. But if you inject a bunch of ambiguity into there, you get what you get. So anyway, we didn't cover yesterday the story on Prince Andrew, and I know it's not necessarily of particular interest to us here in the States, but it is kind of a unique thing that happened. So I figured we would cover it at least briefly. Give me just a second here while I pull this story up because I don't remember where I put it. Jeffries. Oh, yeah. Jeffries, Speaker of the House, or former Speaker of the House, or whatever he is, the head of the Democrats in the House, he had to lay down ground rules for the Democrats for the State of the Union, which I thought was kind of funny because they all act like children and just do whatever they want. And look, I don't support Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm very glad she left. I don't like that she was yelling like a fucking child at Biden's State of the Union. It was disrespectful to the country. I don't care about Biden. It was disrespectful to the country. It was childish and it was stupid. But that is the only instance that you can point to on the right, whereas we can point to literally every State of the Union on the left. Nancy Pelosi ripping up Trump's speech. The yelling and heckling from Democrats at virtually every other speech. Anyway, I was just stalling to try and find this, but then I got talking about it, so now I'm not looking for it. Let's see. There it is. Former Prince Andrew released after being arrested amid Epstein revelations. The British police on Thursday evening released Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, after taking him into custody for several hours, intensifying the long-running crisis for the monarchy over his ties to the convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. The detention and questioning of Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, once seen as a dashing war hero and favorite son of Queen Elizabeth II, was a staggering blow for the monarchy. It was the first time in modern history that a member of the British royal family had been arrested. The last time was in 1649, when Charles I was executed for treason during the English Civil War. The authorities said that they had arrested Mr. Windsor on suspicions of misconduct in public office without providing details. The arrest came amid... They can do that in Europe. The arrest came amid reports of the former prince had shared confidential information with Epstein while serving as British trade envoy. Under British law, suspects are often released after questioning but later charged. The Thames Valley Police, who was carrying out the inquiry, said in a statement on Thursday evening that, quote, the arrested man has now been released pending investigation. Mr. Windsor has consistently denied wrongdoing. His representatives did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Buckingham Palace has been dogged by scandal for years over separate allegations that the former prince sexually abused a young woman. In an effort to stem the fallout for the monarchy, King Charles III last year stripped his brother of his royal titles and evicted him from the Royal Lodge, his sprawling residence in Windsor. In a remarkable written statement, King Charles confirmed his brother's arrest. A spokesman said that Buckingham Palace had not been informed of the arrest before it took place Thursday morning. Yeah, I'm sure. The police were seen on Thursday at the estate, the privately owned 20,000-acre country retreat of King Charles III and Queen Camilla in Norfolk, England, where Mr. Windsor is living. Here's what else we know. King Charles said he supported a full, fair, and proper process regarding the investigation of his brother, adding that he backed the authorities involved. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation, he added. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. The British police have not released details on the specifics of the investigation, but a number of documents released by the U.S. Justice Department last month suggest they may be investigating whether he improperly shared confidential government documents with Jeffrey Epstein. Virginia Roberts Guffrey, on the other hand, one of Mr. Epstein's victims, said that the financier had trafficked her to Mr. Windsor around 2001, when she was a teenager, and that he had forced her to have sex multiple times. In 2022, he paid Miss Guffrey an undisclosed sum to settle a lawsuit in New York in which she had said he had sexually abused her when she was 17. Mr. Windsor, who did not admit to any of Mrs. Guffrey's accusations against him in announcing the settlement, has denied any wrongdoing in relation to his friendship with Epstein. More broadly, the Epstein files have implicated several other members of British elite. The police are investigating whether Peter Mandelson, a longtime British political operative who served as ambassador to the United States, committed misconduct in public office by sharing sensitive government documents with Mr. Epstein. He denies any criminal wrongdoing. The latest files also revealed that Sarah Ferguson, Mr. Windsor's ex-wife, and the one-time Duchess of York had carried on long and personal correspondence with Mr. Epstein long after the disgraced financier was convicted of soliciting prostitutes in 2008. Okay, so here's why this matters, guys. And it's really simple. This is not the British government being consistent. That's what they're going to try and paint it as, right? Look, he's the prince, but it doesn't matter. The law's the law. These accusations have come out. We must investigate. First of all, nothing's going to end up happening. Worst case scenario, he'll go to a white-collar jail where he's released 8 hours a day to go home. Worst case scenario. Most likely, they'll decide they don't have enough proof and let him go, and he'll just live off in peace but disgraced. Now, apologies. Here's why I know this. This is part of why getting these files released has been such an ordeal. Because there's no doubt that the British government, King Charles, was putting pressure, along with many other governments probably, on the Trump administration, using any leverage they had to prevent this stuff from coming out. Remember, the government's had these documents for a long time. All of these other countries, they have their own CIAs that can get this information on their own, let alone the fact that we are close friends with Britain and share this kind of information all the time too. The fact that they've waited till now, when these documents went public, proves that this is not about upholding the law. This is only about public appearance, and they are willing to throw Charles under the bus in order to maintain the crown. That's what powerful people have always done. If somebody is dumb enough to get caught, sorry, we have to preserve the power. That's first and foremost. Now, if he was actually an upstanding man, King Charles would stand by his brother even if he had done wrong. He wouldn't necessarily make excuses for him, but he'd still stand by him. But he's not doing that, is he? Because preserving power is more important. They knew about this. They knew about it the whole time. The problem is, you didn't know about it. But now you know about it, so they have to do something about it. That's why this matters. As far as how it affects us, it doesn't really. It's just important to note, especially because, of course, leftists are going to do their best to try and say, well, look at Britain. They're putting people in jail because of it. No, they're not. They're saving face. And the fact is, so far, what the Epstein documents have showed us is there is not nearly enough evidence to prosecute anybody that hasn't already been prosecuted. And that sucks. That really sucks. But we can't prosecute people based on what we believe, only based on what we have evidence for. The other thing that the documents prove is that Donald Trump is the only person that ever knew Epstein that helped in the investigation against him without having to be subpoenaed. The prosecutor on the case said multiple times Trump was the only person to return his call and the only person he didn't have to subpoena to get help in prosecuting Epstein. He's also the only person on record to have publicly broken off contact with Epstein specifically because of his creepy behavior. towards the waitress at Mar-a-Lago that was underage. Why would Trump make a big deal out of that if they were supposedly pedophiles together? It would be par for the course. It doesn't make any sense. He's also the only person involved with Epstein, or that was at one point rather, involved with Epstein, that never contacted him again after his conviction in 2006. In fact, the only person Trump contacted regarding Epstein after his conviction in 2006 was the prosecutors to help them prosecute him. You would think if he was involved, he would want to stay as far away from it as possible. All of the rest of the people, Bill Clinton, all the rest, continued to talk to him after that. All of the other accusations were random phone calls that were given to the tip line that have no names attached to them, no dates, no credibility whatsoever. The last thing, there was actually 4 points, because the last point was that every victim that has come forward publicly and put their name on the record and said, I am a victim of Jeffrey Epstein one way or another, whether of him directly or of somebody because of him, was asked on national television by, I believe it was an MSNBC anchor, but I can't remember offhand. I've played the video before. Do you or anybody you know, or have you or anybody you know, rather, witnessed the president commit any crime regarding Epstein? Every single one of them said no. Every single one. Make what you will of that. All right, what else do we have tonight? Let's read this opinion piece. This is from a leftist about California. It's in here somewhere. By the way, I said it before, or I said it at the beginning of the show. A lot of people have tuned in since then. If you didn't, go back and listen to our story about Petty First Class Sergeant, I think it was. God dang it. What is this? E6, U.S. Navy, rank. Petty Officer First Class. What's his full name? Petty Officer First Class Patrick Tate Adamiak. Go back and listen to the first part of the show. It was the very first thing we discussed. This man was quite literally framed and put in jail for completely legal items that he owned in a way that literally anybody in America could be jailed for if the ATF wanted to. They took completely innocuous items that he owned, including a toy replica of a gun, and an ATF agent named Officer Jeffrey R. Bodell illegally converted those. Petty officer didn't illegally convert them. The ATF agent Bodell illegally converted them himself to fire AK ammunition, and then charged Adamiak with the crime. He's been in jail for 3 years. He's serving a 20-year sentence for completely legal items that he owned that you can still buy legally online today. If you own a gun and it is semi-automatic, the ATF could come in, arrest you. Piece of shit Officer Bodell could convert your semi-automatic into a fully automatic and then charge you with a felony for it. It's that easy, and that's exactly what they did in this case. The Second Amendment Foundation is the one that is spearheading his case. I shared it on my profile. Please go take a look. This kid, he was accepted into BUDS training. That's where he would be a Navy SEAL right now, assuming he made it through BUDS. But he would be a Navy SEAL right now if he wasn't illegally charged with these crimes that he didn't commit. And the judge even admitted that he did not possess the necessary materials under the law and still charged him anyway. Please share it. Make a big deal out of it. Anyway, back to this California thing. Right here somewhere. How California is damaging faith in government. This comes from the New York Times opinion board. And was written by... Is there a name attached to this? It was written by the editorial board itself, which generally means a collection of people. The editorial board is a group of opinion journalists whose views are informed by expertise, research, debate, and certain long-standing values. It is separate from the newsroom. All it says. Let me see. Sometimes then at the end it'll have a single name, but it doesn't look like it. Nope. Okay. So, keep in mind, it's coming from the New York Times, but long before the existence of modern technology, before the internet or even television, Americans quickly learned the results of major elections. By the late 1800s, telegraphs made it possible for people to read the results in the next day's newspaper. By the 1920s, radio networks reported outcomes on election night. Even in close races, with notable exception of the Bush versus Gore contest of 2000, American voters usually knew within a day who had won the presidency, control of Congress, and most other major offices. For more than a century, the rapid resolution of U.S. elections was the norm. No longer. In each of the past 3 congressional election cycles, Americans waited at least a week to find out if Democrats or Republicans controlled the House. The main reason? California, the nation's most populous state, home to 52 House districts. It allows mail-in ballots to arrive up to 7 days after Election Day and counts ballots with agonizing slowness. After this year's midterms, the country may once again spend days waiting on California. Check out this graph they provide. I'll put it on full screen here. This is the average, and this is California in orange here. How long it takes them to report ballot percentages. Notice it never reaches 100 for either. But starting November 6th and ending on November 20th, and it takes literally till the 19th, it looks like, for California to reach close to the rest of the nation in counting. Give me one good reason that would be. They want to be thorough? Why not just report it quickly, and then if there's a mistake, we can talk about it later? Why wait 7 days? What is the point of having an election day, a specific deadline for the rest of the country, if Californians can keep voting up to 7 days later? More or less saying, hey, if it looks like we're going to lose, hurry up and get those ballots in. There's a deadline for a reason, and it has to be at some point. It should be Election Day. It always has been in the past. And no, if you're going to mail your ballot back, it shouldn't be that you can mail it by Election Day. It should have to be in by then. It's not that hard. If you forgot to mail it and it is Election Day, then take it to a polling place and turn it in, and then you know for sure it got there. It's not that hard. It really isn't. And I've talked about many times how my state of Washington makes it incredibly easy. If somebody wanted to cheat, I'm not alleging anybody has, they make it incredibly easy if somebody wanted to cheat, and we would never know the difference because all of the ballots would be perfectly legitimate. Legitimate. And here's why. The state of Washington has only allowed mail-in ballots for the last, I shouldn't say only allowed. They have allowed mail-in ballots, and they use primarily mail-in ballots for the last 20-some years. Here's why that leaves us wide open to fraud. A lot of people think, well, if I want to commit fraud, then what I have to do is I have to get a ballot and I have to figure out a way to fake a bunch, print it and make it look real and put in a bunch of real or fake ballots that look real. No, it's way easier than that. And part of that is because they never clean off the voter rolls. Every single election, there are roughly 7 million people in the state of Washington. These numbers are off the top of my head. I've given the specific numbers before. If you want to go to anchor.fm/JBU, you can find the specific episode that is titled How Washington State Steals Elections or something like that. And I go through the exact details and I show the exact references, all of that. But just for the simple explanation right here, I'm going off the top of my head with these numbers. So if I'm off a little bit, forgive me. But these are very close to accurate. Sorry, I'm noticing that it's okay. There are 7 million people in the state of Washington. There are about 5 million registered voters. Of those registered voters, only about 3 million people actually turn in a ballot on any given election. 2020 was a record-setting year with 4 million. 7 million people, 5 million registered voters, roughly 3 million people actually vote. That implies that there are roughly 2 million people on the voter rolls that at least don't vote, but probably aren't legitimate voters. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they are legitimate. What it means is every single election, 5 million ballots, one for every registered voter, is printed. 5 million legal, legitimate, non-fraudulent ballots are printed and mailed out. 3 million of those come back as signed by the person that voted. What does that mean? That means there are 2 million, at least 2 million blank ballots that are perfectly legitimate. They were printed by the state. They're not fraudulent. They belong to a registered voter somewhere, just floating around. And all you have to do if you wanted to cheat was collect usually like a couple thousand at the most. It depends on, what race you're trying to cheat in. If it's the presidential, in the state of Washington, you need about 100,000 of those 2 million ballots. If you're just trying to cheat the governor's race, you might need 50,000. If you're just trying to cheat a local race, you only need a few hundred of those 2 million blank, unfilled out, legitimate ballots that are floating around. And all you have to do is fill it out and sign the name of the person which is printed on the front, because remember, it was mailed to them, so that has their name and their address on the front of it. All you have to do is sign the name printed on the front, on the back, and turn it in, and nobody is the wiser. You might say, well, but we would know if somebody turns in a bunch of ballots. Yeah, you're right, we do. It's completely legal to turn in other people's ballots. In fact, it's done all the time. Ballot harvesters are DNC and RNC, but primarily and overwhelmingly DNC party members that go to places like old folks' homes, places where probably a lot of people aren't actually filling out their ballot, to collect completed ballots to make sure that they get turned in. So it's not unusual for people to come in with a box full of ballots. The only check as to whether or not that ballot is legitimate is the signature on the back. That is the only way that they could verify in the moment while they're counting it that, oh, maybe this ballot isn't correct. But do you think that they're able to actually verify 3.5 million signatures on election night? Because they're not. And even if they were, they don't. You know how I know they don't? Because for the last 5 elections, the 5 or 7, I've been spitting out so many numbers now I forget. But it's at least the last 4 elections, I have signed my name incorrectly every single time I turned in a ballot. I have yet to have a ballot rejected. Never once have they called me and said, hey, your signature doesn't match. In fact, it doesn't even say the right name. Nope, they've been counted. I can go online and check. It's been counted. So they don't check the signatures. And that means that there is no reason whatsoever to trust the results of Washington state elections. Thanks to COVID and this Time article right here, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election, where they admit that a cabal of powerful people, I kid you not, that's in there, we read it last night on the show, organized to change the laws on voting in 2020 to fortify the election. So now states like California operate exactly the same way as Washington, where there are millions of legitimate ballots printed every single election that get mailed out and go to nobody. And the only thing you would have to do to cheat is collect those unfilled out ballots, as many as you needed to sway the election, fill them out, and turn them in. And that's why these states want as many days as possible to keep finding ballots. Because it's one thing to have 1 million ballots laying around unfilled out. It's another thing to try and get the 20 people that you trust to cheat with you to be able to fill out 1 million of them in one night. You also don't know how many of them you need filled out. And when you fill out a ballot, do you only fill out the presidential race, for example? Or do you tend to fill out every race, or at least every one that you recognize? I have never filled out a ballot and not filled out every bubble on the ballot. If I don't know either person, I'll put myself down. I'll put something down over nothing. You know how many ballots in mail-in only states come back as only filled out for the president race, or only filled out for the governor race, or whatever race is contentious? It's a lot. I don't have a specific number offhand. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. But it's a lot. It's a lot more than 0. Doesn't prove anything. Except that if you wanted to cheat, it would be incredibly easy to do and incredibly difficult to prove. Let me continue the article there. No, that's not the article. Man, I'm all jacked up now. Let me fix this. There we go. There's that. This needs to go back here. And where is this stupid article? California adopted its rules with the admirable intention of maximizing voting access. Yeah, I don't know, that's admirable. Do you know our founding fathers never gave anybody a right to vote for a reason? And no, the reason was not to deny black people the right to vote. Black people have been legally allowed to vote ever since the first election and voted starting in the first election. It is an abject lie that voting was restricted in order to deny women or any race. It's also an abject lie that you or I have a right to vote. Nobody has a right to vote. The 13th and 19th Amendment, if I have those amendments wrong, I apologize, but the one that ensures that you cannot be denied based on race and cannot be denied based on sex. Listen to what I just said. You cannot be denied a right to vote based on sex, or not, it doesn't say a right, it says the ability to vote based on sex or based on race. It does not say you have a right to vote regardless of race or sex. It says you cannot be denied. Meaning, you're not guaranteed a right to vote, but you cannot be denied solely for these reasons. White people don't have a right to vote. We never have. The reason that voting was limited to property holders in the beginning of the country was not to deny black men of the right to vote. The fact is, there were plenty of free black men, and there were plenty of free black men that owned property. There were also plenty of women that owned property. There were some very notable ones, and both the black men and the women that owned property voted. The reason that it was limited to people that owned property is because that was the only primary tax that citizens had back then. There was no such thing as an income tax until the word progressive came around in the early 1900s, and they passed the 16th Amendment, whatever the tax one is, in 1913. The founding fathers recognized that everybody shouldn't be able to vote. You can't have people that don't contribute to the system vote. Only people that contribute and have skin in the game and something to lose should vote because they have a reason to be informed. If you ask me, we shouldn't just be requiring ID. You should have to pay taxes in order to exercise an ability, a privilege to vote. Yeah. That said, but the system has failed. Its benefits are close to nil. Turnout in California has fallen further behind the national average since the state changed its rules. And the cost of the new system are real. When elections are quickly decided, it builds confidence in the democratic process. When uncertainty lingers for days, Americans wonder why government today can often seem less competent than it once was. It's a great question. California's delays also play into the hands of the bad faith political leaders, including President Trump, who lie about vote counting and fraud to sow doubt in any election outcome they don't like. Yeah, because there's no Democrats that sow doubt in the outcome of 2024, right? Or in the outcome of 2016. Didn't they call Hillary Clinton the rightfully elected president for like 10 years after 2016? But I digress. Let's see. To be clear, only the people who tell these lies are responsible for them. But California is playing into the hands of the misinformation peddlers for no good reason. Several other states also sometimes take days to count their votes, including Arizona, Nevada, New York, and Washington. Huh. Aren't those all the states that there was a lot of questions surrounding in 2020? It's some of them. Nevada, Arizona. There wasn't a lot of questions around Washington unless you lived in Washington. Then it made no sense at all what actually happened. But yeah. They, in California, are outliers compared with other states and other high-income democracies. We aren't a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. Even Congress, which now is a democracy, it's a direct vote, 51% wins. It was never supposed to be that way. And it never used to be that way until, again, the word progressive came around. Progressives changed it. It used to be that the people you elected for state representative, they picked your Congress representatives. Because they knew who was capable of representing effectively. Anyhow, several other states, I already read that, lawmakers in these outlier states should change their systems to resolve elections quicker. Ideally, lawmakers would act in this time for this year's congressional elections. If they are unable to, they should make the changes before the 2028 elections. California's slow counting of votes has its roots in a 2014 law. Until then, the state required mail-in ballots to arrive by Election Day. That year, California introduced a 3-year grace period for any ballots postmarked by Election Day, in response to the closing of some U.S. Postal Service facilities. The state has since extended the period to 7 days. The goal is to ensure that even a highly unusual mail delay does not disenfranchise anybody. You know, based on the way that California is going, maybe some people should be disenfranchised. You guys are paying, what, $3 more a gallon than everywhere else in the country for gas right now? Your leaders are trying to increase taxes for, what, the 50th year in a row? And they still have a budget shortfall? You have lost how many billions of dollars to companies fleeing the incredibly ridiculous taxes in that state? The cost of living is 100% higher than anywhere else in the country, 500% higher than the average red state. Maybe some of your voters should be disenfranchised. The changes have not accomplished that goal. Hasn't even accomplished the goal. In 2012, when ballots had to be received by Election Day, 0.5% of ballots were rejected because of lateness, and the share was an identical 0.5% in 2022. When the grace period was 7 days, how could that be? As any college student knows, human beings tend to procrastinate until a deadline. The longer the grace period led more voters to mail their ballots later. Tends to be how it works. A deadline's still a deadline regardless of what a deadline is. And they know that. They know that it's not helping at all. They need that extra time to see where they need to inject more ballots. California exacerbates the problem by using an onerous process for confirming signatures on mail-in ballots and taking days to count many votes. As a result, outcomes remain unclear for days. In other states that count votes slowly, the details vary, but they all involve mail-in or drop-off ballots. The crucial point is that none of these systems is superior to those in the many states that count their ballots rapidly. Slow counting states do not have higher turnout on average, nor do they have more secure elections. Voter fraud is extremely rare nationwide. Yeah, but again, in states like Washington or California where you have mail-in or drop-off ballots, there would be no way to tell. You would have to go through each and every ballot and track down each and every person and say, did you fill out this ballot? Now, what you might be able to do if you actually went through each and every ballot is find all the ballots where they only voted for one election, or all have similar looking signatures, or maybe the same date written on them. For example, in 2021, there were many ballots, I believe it was in California, it might have been Georgia, that were flagged as having dates of over 100 years ago. It seemed that they were using a date of 1900 when somebody didn't put the date on there, which means somebody else filled out that date. Why would you have 50,000 ballots that have this same 150-year-old or 125-year-old date on it? You would never get that by accident. But nobody investigated those ballots. So how would we know? I don't need to read for this. It's just going to enrage me further, but and we've been going for quite some time now. What are we? 3 hours in. Should we do one more story here? Let's see. I have a story on migration, providing manpower for European defense. I have... He took care of the ATF case. I have a potential terror attack that took place. I guess we can cover that real quick. Give me 1 second here. I didn't actually pull this one off my phone, so... I gotta look it up real fast. A potential terror attack inspired by ISIS was thwarted in North Carolina, according to officials. Let's go to the video.
North Carolina say they stopped a planned New Year's Eve terrorist attack before it could happen. The alleged mastermind behind the plot, a teenager who is under arrest tonight. Here's Justice correspondent Scott McFarland.
This might not be the right one.
The FBI says the plot was inspired by ISIS and was going to be carried out by a man who just turned 18 last month. They allege Christian Sturtevant was planning to use knives and hammers to kill inside a grocery store and a fast food restaurant in the Charlotte suburb of Mint Hill. And they say they found weapons and detailed plans beneath his bed when they raided Sturtevant's home. They say he planned to be a martyr for ISIS, for which Sturtevant allegedly expressed support when he was as young as 14.
Countless lives were saved here. On New Year's Eve, everyone is at the grocery store. We're all buying the things we need to celebrate, and we could have had a significant loss of life and significant injury here.
The feds say a key tip came from police in New York who'd spotted some allegedly suspicious TikTok posts in December, which they connected to Sturtevant. No plea or comment yet from Sturtevant.
All right, so that was an old case. I got the real one. FBI and Las Vegas police investigate suspected case of terrorism. There we go. There it is. Okay. A man, 23, drove a car full of weapons through a gate of a power facility before shooting himself in the head. This is as odd as the story the other day of the kid that, in full body armor and with a loaded shotgun, tried to run into the Capitol, but immediately gave up the moment he came across a cop. It's just odd. Like, I'm glad nobody got hurt, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's the photo they provide of the car. A 23-year-old man drove from New York to Las Vegas. Wasn't there somebody that drove from Vegas to New York not that long ago to commit a terror attack? Yeah, the one at it wasn't ESPN, but one of the towers. He walked in with a rifle and shot a few people at the specific company. Crashed a rented Nissan Sentra through a gate into a pile of heavy wire reels at the substation before shooting himself in the head. Local police said on Friday, describing the incident as a suspected act of terrorism. Pretty pitiful act, thank God. The suspect, Dawson Noah Maloney, died of self-inflicted shotgun wound, according to the Las Vegas sheriff. He was wearing a soft body armor when police discovered him. There is no ongoing threat at this time. Police initially heard about the incident in Boulder City when it was reported as a suicide. Police discovered in the car 2 shotguns, an AR pistol, several magazines loaded with .223, a box of shotgun shells, 2 flamethrowers, a crowbar, a hatchet, and a cell phone. In Maloney's hotel room, police found material for making explosives, including thermite, ammonium nitrate, magnesium ribbon, metal pipes, and gasoline. They also recovered several books related to extremist ideologies, including right and left-wing extremism, environmental extremism, white supremacy, and anti-government ideology. That's a lot of contradictory stuff. Weird. Given the location and the materials discovered, this incident was treated as a terrorism-related event. The Albany Police Department had received a missing report from Maloney, McKill said, but he also said that Maloney communicated with family members just before the incident, making multiple statements referencing self-harm and saying he would do something that would get him on the news. He wrote a message to his mother describing himself as a dead terrorist son. The FBI is also investigating the incident. A search of 2 residences in the Albany area turned up gun parts, a 3D printer, according to Christopher Delizato, the FBI's Las Vegas special agent in charge. The incident was first reported to the local press after McManiel mentioned it in passing during his State of the Department address earlier that Friday. Just last night, our counterterrorism teams were out and are still out working on an event that occurred here in the Valley, McHill said. It looks to have been a credible counterterrorism threat. Okay, it wasn't a credible counterterrorism threat. It was a credible terrorism threat that all of you failed at once again. The only reason nothing bad happened here, despite the fact this guy was texting family members telling them that he was going to do something, as seems to always be the case, is because he took himself out first. Thank God. I'm glad he decided not to harm anybody else. But let's not pretend that this was at all a win. McHill cited the event when discussing his department's efforts to shore up its counterterrorism unit. Again, you didn't do anything. Las Vegas has experienced several terroristic threats in recent years, but he added the Department of Homeland Security, we see a degradation of what it is that we have relied on for a long time because of the agency's focus on more immigration-type issues. Las Vegas has also historically over-relied on the New York Police Department's intelligence gathering and dissemination through programs like Operation Shield and Operation Sentry for counterterrorism work, he added. We all feel at Las Vegas Metro that we continue to be a target and we must do something different about it. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the goal was here. Again, it's just weird. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. Do we want to do the migration Europe thing? I don't think so. We can save that for tomorrow. I do want to reiterate what I said before I get out of here, though. Before I do that, don't forget to check out my co-host podcast, Allan the American Sincerist, at FirstAllan2 on X. Check out his podcast. And, of course, you can find him on this show, usually Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But I have been having to go on late, and he's on the East Coast. I'm on the West, so it makes it difficult for him to come on. And then my other co-host, Austin, from the Miller Talk podcast. He's been out for a little while. He'll be back again, though. MillerTalk.substack.com is where you can check him out. And MillerTalk_pod on X. He does a interview style podcast, and I was on with him a couple episodes back. We kind of cross interviewed. I was supposed to just be a referee, but it was hard for me not to jump in. A leftist, his name was John Ivory. He's a good guy, and he was willing to come on the podcast and debate ideas with us. Most of it was about immigration that time because that was a hot topic going on. It was shortly after Alex Preddy's death, I believe. And it got a little contentious, but he should be coming back on with us here at some point. So please check them out. And, of course, follow this show, JBU_show on X, or Just Between Us on Rumble. I mentioned earlier in the show, if you want to go back and find it, it's right before the break. So go back to where the break is and then back up just a little further. That true power comes from full transparency of yourself, being completely honest, not just with other people, but being completely honest with yourself, and being able to effectively recognize your strengths and weaknesses. You can only do that with solid and deep relationships. And that doesn't just mean with, family or friends or whatever, or a spouse. It means all of those things. But a spouse especially. Men and women are supposed to be together, I think. Because I think, just like I've argued and just like I said before, with children, you can live a happy life without children, but there is a certain level of achievement that you cannot obtain, obtain without having a child. The same thing I believe is true about monogamous relationships, essentially, between a man and a woman. There is a certain amount of achievement and of satisfaction that can only be obtained through a deep and honest relationship. That's my experience. Despite whatever problems that relationship might have. But you both have to be committed to that. But only then, through those things, and generally, if we're talking about men, it generally requires a solid, at least one solid friendship too, with another guy that is honest with you as you are with him, and that will push you, that will call you on your shit, and all of those things. That is extremely important for men, in my opinion. And it's also really hard to find, too. Don't get me wrong. But without that, I don't know that you can recognize all of your strengths and weaknesses, because you kind of need that person on the outside to do it. And if it's not somebody you trust, you're probably not going to listen when they're trying to tell you. But that is true power, especially in a world where everybody lies, nobody has any credibility. That's where the true power lies. Because you can't be manipulated. You can't be used as a pawn. And it's in itself a true freedom. I don't want to rehash everything I already talked about, so I'll just leave it at that. But we'll talk about it some more on tomorrow's show. All right. JBU@USA.com is where you can send me an email directly. JBU_show is where you can go to X and follow, share the show, all that good stuff. We would really appreciate it. Please follow us on Rumble as well. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitch. Oh, shoot, Twitch. Are you guys able to see this? Did I screw up again? Man, I'm sorry, Twitch. And you guys won't even be able to see the after post. Well, okay. We're usually on Twitch, but we're on YouTube as well. But please watch the show on Rumble. Watch the show on X if you can, because they don't censor us. We can talk about whatever we want. We don't get banned and shadow banned and struck. And when leftists report over and over, it doesn't kill our reach and all of this stuff. So if you like the show, please watch it on X, watch it on Rumble, and like and follow the show there so we can continue to grow it and get out to more people. You can also, this is an audio podcast, so if you like to listen while you're at work or going to the gym or whatever, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you can listen on Rumble, of course, whatever works for you. It's available there. I haven't been as good at keeping up with the audio uploads as far as making sure every episode gets uploaded. I apologize. So Rumble would be the best place to listen for now. But I will be catching up on that here very shortly so that it'll be caught up every day. And the episode that we record that night should be uploaded for the next morning. You can find that, all of the links, all of the places it's available and stuff, anchor.fm/JBU. All right, guys. We will be back at it tomorrow. 8 o'clock West Coast time is the plan. I was a little late tonight. I do my best to stick to the specific schedule, but until you guys start paying me for this, you got to go with what time I'm free. Anyway, where is this stupid outro? There we go. With that, what are we going to go with tonight? My name is Chris, and this has been Jason's Big Umbrella Show.